Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. For anyone that's not been here before, I'm Fraser and I started this channel really because before I took my first ever solo cruise, I had no idea what to expect. I really couldn't find online what should I expect if I go on a solo cruise with MSC or if I go on a solo cruise with Norwegian. And really, I'm hopeful that this channel can potentially help you make the decision of, look, would a solo cruise be right for you? Or actually, do you think it might not be? I'm such a big believer in that there's absolutely a cruise line and a cruise ship for everyone. So hopefully, over the course of the next few weeks, I can help you make the decision that you'd like to give it a try. So yeah, over the next few videos, I'm going to aim to answer the question of, look, I want to go with cruise line X or cruise line Y. What do they do for solo travellers? What do they provide? What do they not provide? What kind of room would I get? What will the experience be like? So all of this we're going to answer in the next few videos. And today the cruise line that we're going to look at is MSC. Now, if you've been subscribed to the channel for a while, you'll know that I just got back about 3 or 4 weeks ago at the point of uploading this actually, from an MSC Virtuosa cruise, and we went up to Norway. Now, previously I have sailed with MSC on Orchestra a few years back, and the experience that I've had on both of those ships could not be more different. Now today we're going to look at 4 different things. So number 1, we'll spend a minute looking at what is normal in the world of solo travel on cruises, or actually is there a normal? Secondly, we're going to move to look at, I guess, my experience with MSC previously. Then we'll look at what I felt the solo concept was like a few weeks ago. And then finally, I've got a couple of suggestions that I would ultimately pass on to, well, any cruise line, but definitely MSC based on what I could see a few weeks ago. Now, kicking off with number 1, what is normal? Now, anyone that's done a solo cruise with more than one cruise line is probably thinking, well, it's definitely not a normal because they're all completely different. And I absolutely would have to agree with that. So on the 7 cruise lines that I've sailed with so far, I can hand on heart say that every single one of them has a completely different solo traveller product. Now, that's fantastic if you're really open-minded and you want to get out there and try all these different things. However, if you find one that you really like, it can be quite dangerous to maybe try another one because you might not like what they do quite as much, or I guess you might like it more. So yeah, long story short, there isn't a normal experience for solo travel, and you will find some that you probably don't like, and then you'll definitely find some that you love. So that probably brings me right on to point number 2, which is my previous experience with MSC. Now, that cruise that I was on a few weeks ago was my 3rd cruise, and it was actually my 2nd time back on Virtuosa. So previously I took a short cruise from Genoa in Italy on MSC Orchestra, which is a much older ship. And then I took last year one of the maiden voyages on Virtuosa from Southampton. And then a few weeks ago, that was back on Virtuosa for a 1-week cruise to Norway. Now, in terms of the experience that those 2 ships have given me, they were completely different. And I've kind of warred in my mind with how to present this really, because the experience that I had last week on Virtuosa actually was completely different to the Virtuosa experience I had a year ago, which that initially didn't sit too comfortably with me, but the reasoning that I was given last year for what I experienced was that COVID was a thing and therefore they couldn't encourage mixing. So we'll get back to that in a second, so let's not dwell too much on that for now. But in terms of the 2 ships, so MSC Orchestra has got just under 1,300 cabins, whereas MSC Virtuosa has got around 2,500 cabins, so it's a significantly bigger ship. However, I would always think that if you go on a cruise with MSC generally, you're going to get the exact same solo travel product across all of the ships, regardless of whether you're on a mega ship or you're on the smallest ship in their entire fleet. Now, back in 2019 on MSC Orchestra, I was, to be honest, really gutted when I got onto that ship, and also really, really disappointed when I got back home. Unfortunately, there was absolutely no solo travel meetup, so that not even a coffee on day 1. There was literally nothing, which meant that as the cruise went on, you found yourself on a ship that obviously had solo travellers on it, but nobody met each other. And that, unfortunately, was the exact same experience that I had last year on Virtuosa, where we were on this huge mega ship that had solo traveller rooms. You were walking into dining rooms and seeing people eating dinner on their own, but unfortunately there was nothing orchestrated to help bring all of those people together. So it even got to sort of the last afternoon on the deck, and you were meeting people who were saying, you know, it's so disappointing that we're all meeting each other now, because had there been even a coffee or had there been a lunch on the first morning or first day or whatever, then you would have known each other for days. And I sort of got the feeling that we were on this big ship with loads of solo travellers on it who were all running around trying to meet each other. It was a very, very weird feeling. Now, the other thing to mention is that previously with MSC, when I've went into a dining room, you've basically had a completely different experience depending on when you've sailed with them. So on Orchestra a few years ago, I ended up at a table with, I mean, it's an Italian cruise line, but you cannot hold language barriers against them at all. I got put at a table full of couples who, unfortunately, none of them spoke English, which, when you put yourself in that situation, sometimes as a solo traveller, I do even feel a little bit awkward, never mind the couples all around the table. And when you're sort of sitting there not able to make any conversation, it definitely means that, you know, night number 2, night number 3, night number 4, you're a little bit anxious about going back into that dining room again. On Virtuosa last year, because of COVID, they actually weren't doing any cross-household mixing, which meant that you could only really sit at a table with like your household, or if you had linked cabins, or if you were on the ship with friends, then you could sit with them. But as a solo traveller, the concept of a table for one suddenly became normal, which was fantastic actually. Now, flipping that completely on its head and moving into point number 3 for today, which is what was my experience like a few weeks ago. Now, when I embarked on the ship, I, to be honest, had thought it would be exactly the same, where the entire week I probably wouldn't meet anyone because there would be no solo travel meetups, there would be nothing to encourage that, which ultimately would mean, again, yep, everyone's running around that ship trying to meet people, and it never really works because there's nothing set up. However, I am absolutely thrilled to report that the total opposite was the case on that cruise. Now, after what I've seen, I would probably put MSC as the best European cruise line that I've cruised with for solo travellers. The level of attentiveness that I saw given to us as a group was absolutely fantastic. So the first thing was on day 1, there wasn't any way to meet. There wasn't any solo traveller meetup. But on day number 2, they had a drink in the main bar. Now, essentially what that was it was a fully crew hosted event, and you would go down to the bar and you would be pointed over to a section of that bar that was dedicated purely for the solo traveller meetup. Now, the thing that I could not believe about that was there was so many people. So usually when I go on a cruise, I would go to the solo travel event and you see 3 people or 4 people that are sort of awkwardly getting to know each other, and you assume when you walk in, that must be the solo table, I'll make my way across. However, I got taken to a section of this bar that had probably about 50 people in it, spread out across 5 or 6 different tables, and I couldn't believe that they were all solo travellers. Now, the big thing on that sailing, the solo travel occupancy was about 30%. So that it just goes to show that if they drop the supplement to an acceptable level, solo travellers absolutely welcome on the ship. So that to me is probably my biggest lesson. Now, the second thing that MSC did, which actually really, really surprised me, and I honestly, I do hope this is the norm, on the first night on the ship, when I showed up for dinner, I couldn't believe that everyone else at my table was a solo traveller. And it took us a few nights to figure it out, but eventually we figured out that a lot of the other tables in the dining room were also full of solo travellers. Now, the really, really good thing about that is that I feel as though MSC really have listened to previous feedback, where you now walk in and on that first night, you get the opportunity to meet other people that are in the same position as you. Now, yes, it's not an informal drink. Yes, you're stuck at a table with people. And yes, if you don't like those people, it might be a little bit awkward because it's dinner. But trust me, being in a situation where you get clubbed in with a family or clubbed in with 3 or 4 different couples at the table, I would find that way more awkward. So this went really, really well for me. Now, what it meant was I actually was able to make a friend on the first night that we then stuck together for the remainder of the cruise, which actually ended up fantastic. And on the second night, when we went to the solo travel meetup, he arrived 5 minutes after me, but ended up sitting way across the other side of the bar because there was so many people in that room. So absolutely brilliant. Now, the other thing that MSC do really, really well on these bigger mega ships is their solo travel rooms. Now, this year when I cruised, I was actually in like a standard balcony cabin, but last year I took a solo travel inside cabin, which for some people, I'll put some photos on now, for some people it's probably a little bit too small, but genuinely, if you're in there as one person, you don't just get a single bed, so you get a much larger bed, but unfortunately that dwarfs the rest of the room, and you don't really have a huge amount of room to move around. However, it's a cruise ship cabin. My logic personally is that I go in there to sleep at night, I go in there to get changed, and I go in there to have a shower before I go back out. So do I need a room that's absolutely massive? No, definitely not. So the fact that they've now got these solo travel cabins on the ships means that they've got the ability to drop that double fee down, which ultimately means that more solo travellers are going to be on the ship, or they'll be attracted to go on the ship at least. So long may that continue, and I really hope that with the ships that MSC are continuing to build, that these cabins will absolutely remain the norm. Now, the final thing that I would say about what I've just experienced with MSC was, and it's a bit of a funny one to feed back on really, but it's probably about crew service and crew sort of attentiveness and attention to detail really. And with a lot of cruise lines that I've been on, the concept of being a solo traveller can definitely be a little bit awkward, and it's even little things that a lot of people might not think about, but when you show up at a table on your own, it's a little bit awkward when you get put at a table for 2 or at a table for 3 or 4 people and all of the other place settings get left there, so the knives and forks, the glasses, the napkins all stay on the table when you're eating. The main reason being, it just looks as though either the person you were meant to be meeting hasn't turned up, or it looks as though you're maybe waiting for people and the waiters aren't sure when to take your order, and it just doesn't feel quite right. Now, what I did realise on this cruise was that any time that I dined alone, I absolutely would, without even asking, have all of the other place settings removed from the table, and straight away the team would come over and ask for drinks, they would come over and check that everything was okay, and it felt significantly more natural than if you were to be on a lot of other cruise lines, which I won't name them in this video, but other examples was when you would show up to bars or when you would go and sit in the atrium, at no point really did the crew assume that you were showing up to wait on someone, and there was always someone there to come over and have a conversation with you and to come over and take your drinks order, and that as a solo traveller is appreciated so much. And I'm not sure if it's how MSC train the crew or if that's just something that these guys have picked up as they've gone along, but yeah, that was probably one of the most positive pieces of feedback that I would give on that one. And I guess that probably brings us to the final point that we're going to look at today, which is what would I ultimately recommend to MSC to improve their solo traveller offering. Now, there's a couple of different things I would look at here, and number one has got to be to try and orchestrate a solo travel meetup on night number 1. Now, for a lot of people, they wouldn't know that if you show up to the dining room, you'll be put at a table with other solo travellers. Now, because they don't know that, they might end up going to the buffet, and actually, they then don't meet anyone on their entire first night. Or a lot of people, if they do speciality dining on the first night, they also miss out on that opportunity, which seems mental, that if you're willing to go and pay extra for a luxurious cruise line experience, you actually then miss out on meeting people as a solo. So that definitely doesn't make any sense to me. So 100% organise something on night number 1. And the second bit of advice that I ultimately would give would be, when you embark on a ship as a solo, your first question, or my first question anyway, is, right, I wonder where the event is, I wonder how I can meet people on this ship. And a lot of cruise lines, actually, they'll give you an invitation, or they'll give you a bit of paper in your room that says, hey, you're a solo, why don't you come and meet up with other people in your position over coffee, over a drink, over lunch, at whatever venue, at whatever time. And that, to me, is probably the best way of informing all of your solo passengers that actually, do you know what? We care about you guys on the ship and we want to get you to meet each other. So when you get into your room, there is an absolute plethora of paperwork there. There must have been, I don't know, like 8 or 10 bits of paper, all telling me different things, all spread out across the bed when I got into my cabin. And if they can all be printed, we absolutely can print one more, which would be an invite to that event on the second night in this case, or to go even better, an invite to the event on night number 1. Now, I guess to close, would I recommend MSC for their solo travel product? Now, if you had asked me this question 5 weeks ago, I would have said, to be honest, if you want to go and meet people, absolutely not. If you want a decent value cruise on a pretty decent mega ship, then yeah, go for that. But if you're going as a solo to make friends and to connect with people, no. I historically would have said they're probably the worst in Europe for that because they just didn't arrange anything. Now, because you're asking me that now, I would say 100% yes. They are a cruise line that now I cannot wait to try again because the number of people that I met on that ship, simply because of the fact there was an event, they put us at the same table, it completely transformed my experience. And I really, really hope that that's not a short-term thing. And I also really hope it's not something that MSC only do on mega ships and that it also translates really well into their smaller ship model. Now, I'll actually be back on an MSC ship towards the end of the year, in November. So at that point, I'll be able to come back to you and let you know if it's the same or actually if it's changed again, who knows. But for now, I would massively recommend giving it a shot. If you like the thought of what you've heard, then let me know in the comments. Would you cruise with MSC as a solo traveller or would you not? Who's your favourite cruise line? And watch this space for the video next week, which is going to look at our next cruise line, which will be Virgin. But for now, thank you so much for watching and I'll catch up with you soon. Great. Bye.